But when I came to Australia, I started with not zero, but minus. I mean, I had $50 in my pocket and no English. So, I really had to prove myself to others. You go through that, and then you realize that actually none of that matters. Over 4 years, I realized what a startup was like, a company that had no revenue. So whilst I was hired as an analyst looking after preclinical studies, animal studies in universities, etc., ultimately I was responsible for writing $5 million government grants.
On today's episode of Agency, I sat down with Maria Halasz, the CEO and co-founder of Stride Equity, Australia's first venture-backed equity crowdfunding platform. Stride Equity is focused on closing the funding gap for emerging businesses while providing wholesale and retail investors with access to investment opportunities. Join us as we unpack what exactly venture capital is, how a business should pitch to venture capitals, and so much more. Maria, welcome to the Agency Podcast. We're excited to have you here.
Thanks, Dan.
I'm pumped for this one because I think when it comes to VC, it's something that I've been excited to learn a lot more about. A lot of our clients here ask a lot of questions about it and are trying to understand how they can raise capital for their ideas and their businesses and how they can better navigate the world of business. And it can be a little scary. So I'm excited to dive in and really try to understand this world a lot better.
I'm excited to be here.
We're pumped. So for you, a lot of people who weren't born in Australia, let's say, and they move here, it can be a little challenging to maybe overcome some of those initial hurdles. For you, what were some of those initial hurdles when moving to Australia and trying to get acquainted and network and meet people?
So I came here when I was 18 and I didn't speak English, certainly not very well. So
yeah,
I think that was one major hurdle.
That's a big hurdle. You could like wave and gesture, but yeah.
The really fun thing was though that I met these fabulous Hungarian people, and they've allowed me to navigate the space well. So I got back into a course that I was already doing in Hungary, so the subjects were familiar. I learned very quickly. I watched a lot of American soap operas, so I developed an American accent in Australia.
Like me when I was a child.
And when you were telling me that story, I completely could relate to that.
Because a lot of people, when they meet me, they're like, where are you from? I'm like, here. And they're like, you sound Canadian or American. And it's just, I was immersed in pop culture when I was a child and I just picked up on the accents. You picked up an American accent in Australia.
Yes, exactly. I got rid of it fairly soon. But, certainly that was my beginning. So that was a huge...
Did you have a go-to soap opera that you loved?
Can't remember any of them now. I think like that Friend. I can't remember the name of the podcast of the show. The Nanny. The Nanny. I like the Nanny. So this style of really educational, deep and meaningful.
So you're picking up all the slang and all the rest of it.
Exactly. I didn't understand half of it, by the way, but that was the whole point. That by the end of it, you kind of learn.
So for you, what was that pressure like in the initial stages when moving here initially and trying to, I guess, network and meet people?
So I had a really easy time because I arrived here on the 9th of October and the deadline for applying for university entry was something like 12th of November. So very quickly I had to go to university, find the admissions office, enroll, find mentors who could assist me with the enrollment. So because that's what I wanted to do. I also, second day, I arrived in Perth and Greylands Immigration Centre. So second day, I was walking around in Greylands and actually in Wembley, and there was this open door. And I looked up, it was a restaurant. It was called Dirty Dick's.
Wow.
Theatre restaurant. So I went in there and I said, I want a job, kind of in my broken English. I said, by the way, we want a kitchen hand. So I suddenly became part of that community, which was theatre people, because it was a theatre restaurant, restaurant people, entertainers, and really rowdy crowds at night. So I fell into became part of a community very quickly.
What kind of theatre was it?
Old English music, kind of.
Like medieval Yeah. So it's like
That's
dinner on a
right.
show kind of setting.
Wenches and wenches outfits, and the guys in their puffy trousers and guitars and singing old English things that I actually didn't understand at the time because I didn't speak English. So it just sounded really good.
It sounds very overwhelming. You're in this wild scenario with this unique group of people. You're studying, you're trying to learn the language. Take me from there. Like, what was the next stages thereafter? Like, when did you start to really pursue the career and figure out what the next phase of your life was going to be?
Look, I haven't really given it a lot of thought. In fact, as part of that community, I went to a party one night, and at that time I finished my degree. And I met this guy, and he was running a biotechnology company, and he said, I need an analyst who understands biotech because we've got all these preclinical studies in universities. So I said, that's me.
There you go.
And I just volunteered, and I got my first job in biotechnology in a startup, essentially. So over 4 years, I realized what a startup was like. A company that had no revenue, a company that had a few employees that had to do everything. So whilst I was hired as an analyst looking after preclinical studies, animal studies in universities, etc., ultimately I was responsible for writing $5 million government grants and business plans. And actually we listed the company during that time. So I also went through an IPO and reported directly to the board. So it was an incredible learning experience with really good people, very clever people. So I fell into it. I had no plan, no design on my career, but I suddenly fell in love. And I knew that whole startup environment, whether it's biotech, technology generally, is where I wanted to be.
From your experience as an analyst in that situation, how would you define a startup? Is it traditionally in a setting where they're doing a lot of work, creating a lot of materials, resources, data, productizing, all the rest of it, yet without any profit for a season? How would you define a traditional startup in that kind of scenario?
I would say startups come in different shapes and sizes. You can define a startup as, I want to open a car wash. That's a startup. But then you can define startup, I've got this amazing idea. It involves this new technology. I need all these people around me. It's going to take 5 years before we even know whether it works or not. Then another 5 years to productize it and really put it, to the market. Do they want it? So I think startups come in all shapes and sizes. Fundamentally, it starts with the person, an entrepreneur, a vision, an idea, and someone who's prepared to do the hard work to get from A to B to C to Z.
So you're in this setting, you're getting acquainted with this new world. Like you said, you kind of fell into it, which is, I love it when there's a story around serendipity, like things just kind of evolved and happened and you take heed in those situations. What's your personal view on motivation in that setting? For you, is it something that you are seeking, or is it something that naturally comes to you to really invest yourself into something like a startup and, spending long hours, I imagine, and trying to link things together and do an IPO? What was it that was sustaining your motivation through that season?
I guess what I would say is constant craving. And that is, it sounds really desperate. And it is a little bit desperate. But, you have to have hunger. You really have to be hungry for something. And I'm still really, really hungry right now in that, I'm not there where I want to be. And I'm not quite sure where I need to be. But so long as you've got that inner drive, that hunger that you want to pursue, I think that's a pretty strong motivator. And then, of course, the need, in that, you need to move yourself forward. Mm-hmm. You can't stay in one place. You have to keep learning. You need to keep moving. So to me, that constant hunger is the biggest motivator. And, earlier in my life, it's certainly been proving that I'm worthy, proving that I'm okay, proving that I fit in. I grew up and I was a very clever kid and talented and promoted through the system in Hungary. But when I came to Australia, I started with not zero, but minus. I mean, I had $50 in my pocket and no English. So, I really had to prove myself to others. And, you go through that, and then you realize that actually none of that matters. But it's a long journey. Luckily I'm at the point now where I can put that away most of the time at least. And I can just really focus on being hungry for new things, hungry for learning, hungry to get to know new people. I get so inspired by the young people around me. I'm working with one of the most amazing young VCs. And so, that motivates you.
When you were in that season with the IPO and the initial, what was it, 4 years?
Yes.
What was the realization that you had that you found like your gift or your calling? Were there moments where you're like, I'm really good at XYZ? What were those discoveries for you?
I think the most amazing thing was to me is that I was working in this company and I was doing lots of different things and I really loved all the variety of the different things. And then one day we had to put together that big business plan, went to the board and then went to the government for government grant funding. And one of the directors, who I always thought that he really disliked me, like he had no time for me. He was one of those people who probably didn't like women very much, didn't think that, women could contribute enough. But in any event, I just felt really underappreciated by him and actually dismissed. And at some point, he just turned around in a board meeting when I was presenting and said, "Did you do this? This is really good." And I thought, maybe I am good at some things. But I mean, I just loved, I knew that I'm really good at detail. I mean, coming from a scientific background, you really need to focus on the detail. And I knew I'm really, really good at it. What I discovered during the process that I was also really good at being strategic and, stepping away and then helping the team to get from A to B from a strategic perspective. So I really loved the whole journey, my first 4 years in that company. As I said, I've learned enormous amount.
In that position where you're trying to drive revenue and grow capital for a company, are you simultaneously having to look at things big picture and the details and find a balance between the two? Do you seem to lean one way or the other, or do you think that there's a harmony needed to see both sides?
I think it a little bit depends. The company, I was involved with was very scientifically based. So the science was critical. So if the science wasn't working, then nothing was working. So if your little picture didn't work, then the big picture made no sense. And I'm kind of a little bit used to that. So in fact, subsequently I ran a listed company. And again, it was very scientifically based initially, but then we productized a consumer health product. And even with that, I really felt like the little things make all the difference. Like, you guys are experts at branding, and we weren't. So we had to bring in expertise around branding and really fine-tune to have an authentic message behind our product. But at the same time, it just had to be perfect. And so I think little things make an enormous difference. So you really have to focus on the detail. But then if you don't have a strategic view, you're not going to be able to lead people. You're not going to be able to tell people, follow me because this is where we're going. And I think you need both as a leader.
Was there a moment in there where you had a big hunch of like, we need to do something, and then faced resistance around, we can't do that or what have you, and you persevered and pushed through?
You mean in my early career or?
Even like through till now, like maybe what are some of the most challenging moments that you've faced in your career where you've had a hunch and you are a detailed person, you know that the plan's going to work, you've seen the big picture, and you've faced a large myriad of resistance. In those moments, what are the things that you dig into in your skill tree to like persevere in those moments?
In my entire career, I've been known a little bit among, at least for some people, that I am good at raising capital. And I've developed that skill because the biggest challenge for any startup is funding. And it's raw in myself. I can still feel it in our original startup when it wasn't my responsibility because I was just an analyst, but I've worked with the board very intimately to actually develop a strategy where you can see, okay, well, this is my path in the next 5 years. and it takes me 5 years to generate enough revenue so I don't have to raise any more money. How am I going to get there? It's not going to be my first capital raising and not going to be my second. There's going to be steps. So I guess for me, it's kind of inscribed in me how important it is to secure funding and the capital for your business. Hence, I think my calling around venture capital.
So for someone who's, I guess, in the early stages of their idea or building their IP or launching themselves in the market, and they know they don't have the means to generate capital enough to execute their idea themselves, what are some of those initial things that people should be conscious of around the early stages of putting themselves in a position to then earn capital? What would someone in your position like to see in an entrepreneur's idea or business before you would be confident to invest capital?
I think every investor is different. And you've got investors, friends, family, and fools who will back you because you've got a nice idea. And actually, most companies get funded like that initially. That's kind of an early stage. So if I'm a founder and I've got a really great idea, it's not turned into a proper business yet or even a business plan properly yet, then the people who love me and care for me and trust me should be the first source of capital. And if those people don't back you, it's very difficult to imagine that you go to someone who doesn't know you to back an idea that really hasn't fully formed yet, or you're not quite sure where it is. So every stage of your business, there are different types of investors that you need to think about or tap into. And every stage, those investors require different proof points for their investment. And I think there comes a time, and everybody talks about venture capital funds and venture capitalists. And in Australia, we've got a very small venture capital industry, obviously, and it's very narrow in a way they invest. But they do look for founders who can execute, of course. They look for, right now, everything is about cash flow. So they want to see line sight profitability. They want to see $1 million annual recurring revenue, all those things that are actually idealistic, because most startups don't have those things. So then, between this and between family, friends, and fools, where do you go for money? And I think that's where all these other alternative sources come online. And today in Australia, we're really lucky because we've got a lot of other different ways of funding businesses. There's the angel investor groups, there's syndicates, there are all the alternative funds. And then, of course, you've got crowdfunding or these digital platforms where you can invest. And each of those have very different requirements and proof points that you need to bring so that you become investable, essentially, from their perspective.
So you touched on the friends, family, and fools. I love the fools component.
I thought everybody knows the 3 Fs.
I've not heard the 3 Fs. I love that. So friends, family, and fools, I imagine, is just kind of everyone else who's kind of in the vicinity who could give you capital. What it sounds like is maybe, in people's minds at least, you kind of, from my experience talking to people, is they don't feel good going to their friends and family because they feel that, in the event things go awry, they're going to sever relationships with their loved ones. What's your advice around someone who's in a position where they maybe could go friends, fools, and family? What are some things that people should consider before doing that?
I actually have written about this because I've given this a bit of thought from personal experience. And I think it's really important that you're very, very transparent. And you tell anyone around you love who might consider putting money into your business, tell them that you might lose this all. I'm going to do my absolute best. I'm going to kill myself over this. I'm going to work 90-hour weeks. But even then, we may all lose everything. Are you comfortable with that? And if you're not comfortable with that, please don't put the money in. You have to be so transparent because, there is so much at risk. And it's not the money, it's your relationship. And that's worth more than any money. So make sure that you're really transparent. That's one thing. You have to be transparent at the beginning, but you have to be transparent all the way through. And also you have to, once they decide to invest in you, you need to be pretty formal. Really be specific about what they're investing in, how much, and what they're going to get out of it. Because once there's money on the table, let's say your business is really successful, that's where the disputes and arguments come. So treat them, once they decide to invest, treat them like they were a third-party arm's length investor. Put everything in writing. Make sure that it's no dispute, potential disputes, no fudgy things in it. You put that much money, this is what you get out of it. Really critical.
Which makes sense, because I'd imagine with family and loved ones and fools, emotion gets involved. And if things aren't written down, and I guess our tendency would be to not write these things down because we're going on a handshake. We love each other. We're family. We know each other. Of course, we wouldn't do the wrong thing. But in that lies the ambiguity of, well, what do I actually get when things are doing well? To your point, when you said that it's usually the disputes that happen when things do well, what might some of those be?
Well, everybody remembers things differently. Our memories are not particularly reliable, and that's basically science. You can rely on one thing, and that is everybody will remember things differently. Oh, by the way, you said to me that I'm going to be your major investor. Now you're telling me that I only get 5% of the business? Well, that's not what we agreed on, is it? Well, you may have said, I want you to be a big investor owning 5%, but if you didn't say that, didn't put it in writing, and it's not, black and white, your investor may only remember the first part of the sentence. So, it's these are the disputes that will invariably arrive once there is money on the table.
I like that it's treating it formally as though they were a professional investor, writing everything down and being as transparent and as clear as possible. And it sounds like you try to paint the worst case scenario. Worst case scenario, this goes bust. Are you still in? Are you still going to back me? Yeah.
But the next step is that you need to keep people abreast of what's going on. And you have to be especially transparent if things go wrong. Like if you know something is going to go wrong, you're going to talk to them and say, look, this is where we are. This is what we've done. By the way, the risks are really significant in the next steps. I want you to be aware. Or we've put all this effort in, but it didn't work. The sooner you tell them, the better. I think delivering bad news is really tough, but it's really important that you do in a timely manner, and very transparently, very clearly, very matter-of-factly. Just treat people with respect.
Because I can imagine someone's mind might wander and think of all kinds of nefarious things in the event where you're not communicating. They might be like, what's happening? I haven't heard an update, what have you. Just be very forthcoming, very proactive instead of reactive, and trying to keep them included in all the steps, good, bad, and ugly.
Look, I mean, any agreement you would say will be providing you with a quarterly or half-yearly report. And when the half-yearly report doesn't arrive, the investor says, what's going on? Now, if you've got some bad news in between or really good news in between, by all means, communicate it, but then keep to the agreement.
So the next step, let's imagine things are going okay, and I have friends, family, and fools invested in the business. What's the next tier above that should be the next step? Because it sounds like if that's the first tier, it sounds like, well, having $1 million on the books and having a great, run on the board with the MVP idea or project to get a big VC to come in. What's between those two calibers? Because it seems like there's quite a chasm in between.
I think that in Australia in particular, we've got a very significant gap. In the US, obviously, the VC industry is much bigger, more diverse. There's a lot more opportunities. In Australia, we're looking at 60 or 65 VC funds, and most of them are very small. We've got, the three big ones, Square Peg, Blackbird, and Airtree. And then you've got all the others and you've got the specialist funds around biotech or, SaaS. And so every fund is pretty specialized and they only invest in certain things. But in Australia, we seem to invest, from our VC funds at least, a huge amount into SaaS businesses. And then if you're not that and you don't have the annual minimum $1 million recurring revenue, then you kind of fall out of that bucket and you have to look at, as you say, have to explode a chasm.
Yeah, it's like an Indiana Jones kind of moment where you're like, I can't possibly pull this off. It's quite a long channel to get from this end to that end. You mentioned before there's crowdfunding.
Yes.
I don't fully understand the dynamic between the difference of that and pursuing capital. What is the difference between crowdfunding and venture capital?
So I think crowdfunding is a form of venture capital for sure, but traditionally in Australia, venture capital is managed through venture capital funds. Those funds are really close to retail investors, and of course, over the years, it hasn't arisen in Australia. It's a U.S. kind of originated concept, but retail investors who don't hit the hurdle of sophisticated investor category, they want it to be part of the growth company culture and part of that investing in startups, being part of the success stories. So, started in the US, of course, this crowdfunding concept where in a highly regulated way, you could invest in startups even if you are a retail investor, meaning, anybody out there who's interested in investing in startups. And so that is very different from a venture fund, where you'd have either superannuation funds putting money in, government sometimes contributes funding, or wholesale investors and institutions would pool money, and they've got a professional group of managers who manage a portfolio of investments within those funds. And those are, in Australia, closed to retail investors right now. Well, when I say that, it's not entirely true, because in some ways, our super funds are investing in those, so we are exposed in a second-hand way to those. But directly, retail investors can't really invest. And so to overcome this, ASIC has a system, which is a crowdfunding system in Australia, where retail investors can invest up to $10,000 into a startup through a licensed intermediary, a crowdfunding platform.
So you're able to have this platform allow people to kind of fill in the blank between friends, family, and fools, and the big VCs where they could potentially pursue crowdfunding through one of these channels.
So crowdfunding traditionally in Australia, and it's been officially regulated since 2018. So it's not a long tradition. But when you look at every year, there's like a flavor of the months. Some years it's breweries or craft beer companies or consumer product companies. These companies would not be suitable for venture investment. Venture funds would not invest in, mostly, by and large, in these companies. And I'm not generalizing. And if you talk to some of the venture capitalists, they said, oh, yes, we do. But then actually, when you look at their portfolio, they don't. So these are companies that still could potentially be really good businesses, great opportunities, but there wouldn't be, VC investment. So if you have a company, if you got a startup, for example, with a consumer product, I would say there is less than 5 venture funds in Australia that would be investing in consumer products today in Australia. So, you need some alternative ways, whether you seek out, angel investor groups or syndicates, which are also available. It's an alternative, or you go to a crowdfunding platform. That's kind of the bridge between family, friends, and fools and VC, at least in Australia.
Now, regarding people pursuing this, and let's say they've done the friends, family, and fools venture, what are some of the misconceptions around the next step? So they're going from their local community and now reaching out to getting external support from strangers, if you will. What are some of the misconceptions or the myths around what people expect and what reality is?
I love this question because when we set up Stride, my current VC group, we had all these companies coming to us. And the one thing we realized is that their expectations are so far away from what reality is. Hence, we put together a sprint investment ready program so that we bring them up to. But I love it because I think startup founders are so in love with their companies, their ideas, rightfully so. I mean, that's what you want. That they kind of lose sight of, okay, why would someone else invest in my business? And by the way, don't just think another company, but think about actually keeping their money in a bank or keeping their money to themselves and spending it. Like, you need to give strong enough rationale for someone to part with their money who is not related to you and it's not a fool and it's not a friend. You have to give them a strong rationale. So put yourself in their position. Like, what would you ask from someone to be convinced to part with your money in that scenario? And that's the hurdle that you have to meet if you're a startup founder. And that means you need to know your domain. You have to be essentially an expert in your domain, whatever it may be. You need to show that you're capable of executing. You need to show that you've got the perseverance and grit to get through, because tough times will come, and that's just the way it is. Then you have to have a cogent business plan. You have to have a product and service that actually solves real problems. It's not about, oh, I've got this fabulous product, who can I sell it to? It's about, that audience really needs to solve that problem. How can I develop a product to solve that problem? That, like, you have to kind of pass those hurdles, because no matter whether you're a syndicate, you're a crowdfunding platform, you're anyone out there who's not related to you will ask you these questions. So be prepared to answer.
Do you think in the common marketplace, when people have their idea, they're so deeply invested in their passion, into maybe the best case scenario and their pursuit of, that they are a little blinded to what is really happening in these negotiations?
I think there are a couple of things happening. One is, I have no competition. Like, they come to ask for money, and we ask you, so who is your biggest competition? We don't have any competition. Now, I have yet to see any business, any technology, any idea in the world that has no competition. And if you don't know your competition, like, this is like a no-go. Like, it's, back to the drawing board for me, because it's just not going to go anywhere. So that is one thing. And the other thing that, founders get really caught up is about my business. I invested, I worked on this for 3 years. I didn't pay myself. So I invested in this business X dollars. And I want an uplift of double. So that's the valuation of my business. Well, sometimes it is true. Sometimes what you've put together is worth 20x of what you put in, but sometimes it's not worth as much as you put in. Not yet. So you need to be able to accept the market forces around valuation of your business. When someone wants to put money in, they're going to tell you at what price they're going to put that money in. And you need to listen, and because it's very, very difficult. And if you are really educated about why, and I had founders who came to us, and I thought, well, that business is worth like 2 million. And he said, well, we want 10 million for it. And I said, well, it's a no-go, sorry. Then he said, let us sit down. And we sit down, and he explains to me, by the way, we've got these strategic investors, big companies in our space who are already putting money at that valuation. Tick. Well, what am I arguing with? I'm not going to argue with the experts who are already putting money. Like, I may have thought originally it's only worth 2, but if they're putting money in at 10, that's what it's worth. So again, if you're a founder and you've got a really strong data-driven argument of why your valuation should be the way you think, bring it forth, because, you can actually negotiate with that.
So I guess if we look at it as like red flags and green flags, a green flag might be, you've got your data, your competitive market. And we hear this oftentimes in the branding space as well, which is, I'm not competing with anyone. Our idea is phenomenal. Usually the rebuttal to that I would say is, well, if they didn't know you existed, where would the consumer go? Essentially, in our perspective, that's maybe another competitive market. They might not be direct, but it might be an alternative or another option to solve a similar problem. For you, you've highlighted a few things around red flags. So red flags are not having their data and not having a correct evaluation and maybe being too emotionally led versus like, here's the facts. What are some other, I guess, red flags, other things that you're like, usually these are the things that would not allow you to get in the door if you do these things? And then on the other side of that, what are the green flags, things that they should square away before pursuing VC?
The biggest green flag for us, and I can't speak for other VCs or other investors, the biggest green flag for us is past success, delivery. So if a founder comes to us and says, well, by the way, we're in this industry, we've been here for 10 years, 15 years, whatever. And by the way, this is our second product into that same market. The first product went this, and what we're doing now is we're actually tidying this up, and there were some other gaps, and we're addressing this, and we need X dollars to get to that market. That's like so exciting for us, because here's a founder who understands what they're up for, have done it before, understand the problem that they're solving, understand why there's a better solution, and they're developing it. We're happy to give the money to that. So that's huge for us. And I always come back to the founder, because ultimately businesses are all about people. Businesses are not businesses without people. And so the biggest green flag is a founder who is motivated, dedicated, knowledgeable, and solves the real problem. The other thing that I personally really love is really interesting technology that looks at problems in a different way. So, all the renewable energy technologies, I mean, you need to put yourself into it, but I really love that space, because I think it is something we can't avoid. It's an essential, and we all need to have alternative ways of solving that issue. And relying on a nuclear or relying on just solar or relying just wind is not going to solve it for us. So we need to see new technologies that actually are better, bigger, and easier to take it to the market. So when I see anything like that, I get really excited. But that's just me, because obviously as a scientist, I'm very technology focused.
And before you were showing me your Aura ring,
Yes.
you love collecting the data on that thing, and now I'm jealous and I want to get one.
You need to get one.
I need to get one. I've tried some other technology like the Apollo Neuro and things out there, and we've had a bit more of a talk about other things that you're looking into, which is fascinating and exciting. And I guess in this space, let's just say someone's coming to you with an idea and it's good, but what are the traits that you're looking for in the entrepreneur? So the individual in front of you, how do you like to see someone carry themselves? What's their moral compass, their perspective on the world, things that give you confidence that this person is going to go the mile?
The immediate thing that comes to mind is being able to learn, or willing to be learning and be instructed. As I mentioned, we just ran a sprint investment ready program for 13 companies to get them ready for investment, essentially. And it's an 8-week program, and we go through things that most people would already know. If you've been around, you need to have an accountant, and you do tax, but then have you got a proper corporate structure? Have you set up your corporate structure so it's suitable for investors to come in later on in your founding journey? Then,
just on that, like, what would be a corporate structure? Are you talking about the hierarchy of the C-suite and the operation, or?
Well, that too. And also the capital structure as well, and the ownership structure. So there's different levels of structures that you have to put in place. For example, make sure that your company is very clean. Your capital structure needs to be really, really clean. If a founder comes to us and they've got a safe note, 2 convertible notes that they issued 5 years ago to some family members, plus a whole heap of ordinary shares, we can't see that as an investable. You need to tidy up your capital structure. Corporate structure, if you have all these advisors that you're paying and you don't know, who's getting paid what, who's in charge with what, who's responsible for the delivery of what, that's also a problem. We also don't like sole founders. I'm not saying that we don't invest in sole founders, but sole founders carry a lot of risks that founding teams don't. So, some basic things that you want to put in order before you go out for. So this is kind of what the course is about. But what we found that out of the 13 companies, just to respond to your question, out of the 13 companies, about 10 of them are eager to learn and went from, caterpillar to butterfly at the end, which is the metaphor I used in our closing evening on Tuesday night, because truly amazing how much they learned, and they were willing to put themselves on the line and learn. And then there were those who didn't. And they, at the beginning of the 8 weeks, they pitched the same pitch as the very end of the 8 weeks. It was the same, not very attractive pitch for an investor. So they're, being able to and be willing to learn is, I think, one of the most important qualities we're looking for. The other thing is, and it's a very Australian thing, I don't find that when I deal with, biotech companies in Switzerland or US, you need to be really likable. Investors like likable people. They invest in people they like. It is a very Australian thing, but I'm finding it more and more and more, that you need to be able to talk to people, you need to be able to relate, you need to be interested,
And that's an interesting point where you talk about at the beginning of the 8 weeks in your program, the people that were pitching their idea that didn't evolve it by the end of the 8 weeks were having the most issues potentially. And you're saying therein, those that were adapting and essentially taking your heed and implementing your ideas, your feedback into their pitches were the ones that probably had the most attention, is because they're willing to adapt. Would you say as an entrepreneur, they must be willing to adapt? They must be willing to be teachable and educated. They must be willing to pivot quickly. And that's maybe a sign of good business acumen or someone who can survive business.
Absolutely. And you've been in business, you know exactly. Yeah. Your business today is not the business you started.
Oh, no. Yeah. And I had a theory about this, and it's like, for me, business is 10% idea and 90% edited. And I think some people's misconception is it's 90% idea and having the perfect plan, and then it's just executing it. I see it as inverted, because so many things happen where you're like, we didn't expect this to go wrong. What do we do? Let's come up with a different idea. And then sometimes that different idea is far superior to the original.
Absolutely. A business is a journey, and, you need to be able to manage the journey, and there are going to be ups and downs, and sometimes more downs than ups. And then, hopefully as you get more and more successes, it's going to turn around. But you need to be able to navigate, adapt, as you said, adapt and learn and iterate and find the best way to go forward.
You strike me as someone who loves the journey and who loves traversing obstacles and challenges, as do I. And I think, sometimes people say to me, I can never run an agency. It looks crazy, but like that's my joy. Is I love and I relish the challenges, whatever they are, good, bad, and ugly. For you, do you enjoy the journey with a business more than perhaps the win at the end? And if that's the case, why do you find so much joy in the process?
The question is, what is the win at the end? What is the end? Like, you in your journey, you celebrate wins, but then where's the end? Like, I think to me, the exciting thing is that, you evolve, you develop, you iterate. You've got those little wins and you work towards those. But I don't see an end per se in any of the businesses. Actually, I've never seen an end in any of the businesses that I ran or funded. I thought there's opportunity for growth. And I was talking to a friend of mine not long ago, and we were talking about my journey. And she said, "Oh, I have one word for you. You're a builder." And it is true. Like, growth and building is my motto when it comes to my professional life. Is definitely what excites me. And of course, you get a lot of things when don't work out.
And I think for you, it sounds like there's a lot of joy in that process and being a part of this journey with someone else and helping them on their way. When you look at it from a VC's perspective, and you have maybe a more altruistic perspective than some, where maybe some investors, I don't know, want to just invest money and get a good return and then move on. To your point on the business doesn't really end, I find that interesting, because some people, they start an idea with a means to sell and to sell out. What's your perspective on someone who is building something, but they're building it for a season because their objective is to sell it and to make a profit.
It's an absolutely legitimate way of building a business. Just because you sell, it doesn't mean it's the end. It's perhaps at the end of your journey with that business, but certainly the business will continue, hopefully, because you sell it to someone bigger, better, and who can do more things with it. From a venture capital perspective, one of the first 5 things we look at is exit. It's very, very important that we see an exit. If we can't see an exit, we can't invest because, obviously we are there to make a return. And whilst you use the word altruistic, I think we're more around community-minded. What we're trying to do is build a community of investors and founders who form a trustful group that can, respect, follow, and learn from each other. So, but nevertheless, our fundamental objective is to make money for our investors and for our founders as well. And we actually, by the way, they're on a journey. Once we get involved with a company, we get involved and we get them connections. Like of the 13 companies within our little group, several of them, we put them in contact with industry partners. We've got some funding that is going to come through from that. Not the purpose of the course, by the way, at all, but it's just a natural, evolution of relationships with people within that context. But exit is incredibly important. We always map the potential exits, likelihood, potential returns that we can see. Otherwise, you can't make an investment.
You mentioned that the exit plan is one of the 5. And I think it's interesting because one of my business mentors said to me, no matter what, always have an exit plan because it gives you a sense of security. If this doesn't work or this doesn't go the way my involvement goes to plan, it can continue to survive without me. And I think that's important in businesses for a business to have a plan beyond you, which I really love. My personal goal is to run this until I'm 80 or 90. I think for me, that's super funny.
I love the quote on your arm.
Yeah, I've got a quote on my arm from Ryan Holiday. It says, "The obstacle is the way." And for me, I think I'm going to work on this business until I turn to dust, but I still have an alternative plan, need be. For you, what are the other 3 or 4 things? If one is an exit plan, in my pitch, and I'm trying to pitch to a VC, like, hey, here's my exit plan, here's my competitive market, here's why I think this is going to work and some of the challenges we've had and how we've overcome them. What are some other things that you might look for in a pitch?
You've just listed some. Definitely, as I said before, the founder, and those are the different things that we're looking for in a founder. Are likable, they're teachable, they're can deliver, can execute, and understand their domain, that they operate in. So the founder is number 1. Obviously, a solution to a problem, and that can be a product or service, we don't mind, but it has to be a solution to a problem. It can't be a product that I want to sell to some new audience that I don't know yet what it is. Then it has to be a large enough market that you can make decent amount of money. Like if you're a VC, you have to be born global as a company, but we don't look at it that way. We think that there are real big opportunities in Australia in certain segments, so you don't have to be a born global company. So, but it has to be still a large enough market. And I think I'm going to forget now what else do we look for. A cogent business plan that, a plan of execution that actually we think can work in delivering the solution to that problem.
And I like what you said there about really trusting that that's the person to lead the charge. One thing you did say earlier was you prefer if it's not a solo founder. What's the reason that you prefer to see a cluster of people leading a company versus one?
Couple of reasons. One is statistically, and there have been studies done on this, that solo founders are less likely to succeed. And I think part of that is because it's such a tough journey, and you need people who believe in you and are around you and keep cheering you on. And it's got nothing to do with the business opportunity or the product or any of that. It's got to do with the fact that there'll be so many obstacles. And not everybody loves obstacles.
It's a nice reminder that it is the reason but I keep
Exactly.
going.
Exactly.
Okay, so then just to ad lib on that, like let's just say someone is a solo founder, and I think what you said there is really important. Just having people around you to cheer you on is a big deal in business. And a big reason this podcast exists is not because of my own doing, it's because behind the cameras here we have Cabe and Cam who are equally as passionate about this as me. And when I'm having a down day, they're like, nah, man, this is the next plan. This is what we're going to do. This is the cool stuff that's happening. It's reinvigorating. And I think sometimes just sharing a vision with others is crucial to success in business. And there's been other times in business where I've had doubts and someone's just whispered in my ear, keep going. So do you find that that's maybe the predominant reason is not having a strong enough community for a lot of people?
I think so. And I, by the way, definitely get that vibe in your office. I mean, coming in here was amazing, meeting Cam and the team, and everybody was there and sharing on what they're doing. And I think to have an environment like that is really important for a founder to continue, because there, as you know very well, there'll be days when you don't really feel like doing much. Yeah, so I think that, but the other thing that you need to do is just ignore the naysayers. And sometimes when you've got a partner, they can shelter you from the naysayers. Statistically, you'll be more likely to have a support than the non-support.
Someone like blocking the hate,
Yeah,
so you can focus on what you need to.
Exactly.
Very interesting. And okay, so then another thought that crosses my mind is, in the event where I'm on a 50-50 split, 50% of me wants to continue to build the business on my own means or with my family, friends, and fools, because I can. And then the other side of me is like, well, if someone's in a position where they're launching a product or what have you, and they're doing okay, they're selling, but they get a hunch that maybe having a VC would help them take it to another level. What are some things that someone can do to identify whether it is a good maneuver for them or not?
Do you mean funding-wise? Or?
Yeah, should they get funding and bring in other parties, or just continue to do it on their own?
Continue to do there on their own. I always say that to founders, bootstrap until you can, until it's all, too hard, and it's actually jeopardizing the success of the.
Oh, I see. So they start to plateau, or they start to.
Yeah, bootstrap the business until you can. Just keep it simpler, easier to manage, and it's just a better way to do it. Unless you've got a very strategic investor who will then turbocharge your business. If someone comes along and said, we can see the value you add to our product portfolio, and if we bring you into the fold, then your market will be 100x. And by the way, we're prepared to invest 20% into your business. That is an investment, is a no-brainer in my mind. Some VCs really dislike it because obviously they move away from controlling the business, and they in the future they won't come in because they say, well, you've got a strategic who's controlling you. Where is our control? So you have to think that through. Again, I'm talking about this 5-year plan of funding your business until, or whatever the time is, until you're completely profitable and you don't really think you have to raise any more money. But I think bootstrap it until you can.
Why is that?
Because people celebrate in Australia when they raise money. And I always think, I'm sorry, I don't understand that, because as soon as you raise money, you have an extra layer of compliance, reporting, trouble, arguments, explanations. Like, why would you bring that in to an already complicated situation of building a startup? If you can, don't.
That's a good point, because I think if we look at the downsides from their perspective, right? So someone who's in a position where they don't have to get venture capital, but it's appealing to them, now all of a sudden they have to report to someone. They have to sell it. They have to have these hard conversations. They really have to, I guess, work more and harder on their business than ever to try to prove to the people that have come on board that it's working. And your perspective is, why would you celebrate at that point if you're essentially shifting gears? You're playing a different game at that point.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of founders are not prepared for it. Not prepared for the fact that once you've got investors, a certain percentage of your very precious time will be spent on managing that constituent. And I think as a founder, you need to be aware that once you take investors in, that's an extra part of your business.
Assuming someone's ready for it and they're going to play ball and they're happy to come to the table and give it everything they have, what are the upsides beyond the capital for someone to partner with someone like yourself or be a part of this community that you're talking about?
I think a lot of the VCs are great at supporting companies, and one of the ways they do that is that open doors. Very, very few founders could pick up the phone and call the CEO of Apple or Microsoft or whatever. But in the US, a lot of the VCs, large VCs, can do that. And if they see a product is suitable for them, then they'll do that for you. They'll pick up the phone to those decision makers who will be buyers of your product or takers of your product or the company. And I think that's a huge advantage. VCs generally also seen everything. Like, in last 20 plus years, I've pretty much seen everything. And so every industry, every kind of technology, 3 rounds of technology called breakdowns in the world and all these new emerging things that are going to change our world. So, they can tell you and feedback, advice. Now, you may or may not want to listen, but, if you're the right founder, you want to listen because they do actually have a point to make. And they're looking after their own investment. Their interests is completely aligned with yours. They want you to succeed. They're telling you stuff. They're saving you time and money to learn it all by yourself. So that as well. So there's the connections, the experience, and the advice at a very minimum level. But also some VCs are quite happy to also do a bit of heavy lifting in terms of come in and say, by the way, we're really good at branding. Our team is really good at branding, and we're going to help you with that.
And that's a good point because let's say most people are in their first idea or second idea and maybe they don't have a lot of experience. Now all of a sudden they're playing ball with people that have got decades of experience and like you said, have seen everything. How would one go about approaching a VC? Like what would be the best initial steps that someone should consider to make that maneuver?
So in Australia, it's really simple. Airtree publishes on their website an up-to-date list of venture capital groups. And I'm not suggesting any founder would do that and, spray paint the VCs with their emails. That's not what you do. What you do then, you start monitoring all the companies that had funding in the last year or two, and look at who the founders were. Funders were within that industry, and then really build a knowledge base around the VCs that you're interested in. Today, it's really simple because most VCs want a profile. So they've got a LinkedIn page and they're posting about stuff that interests them. So build a little portfolio of 8 to 10 VCs that invest in your industry, invest at the stage of business where you are, invest in a type of stuff that you've got, and then approach those and be very specific. For example, if a VC, you just saw a post from them that they've done about a particular topic, comment on that topic, comment on their socials and DM them this way, or even when you write an email. Most of them want you. That's their business. Most of them want you to reach out to them if you're suitable. But what they don't want, and we've had one really good session with Raj Gupta, who's the founder of Allium Capital, and we got him in to talk to our founders in this sprint program, and he explained how important it is. He does not want to hear from people. When it's quite obvious they haven't looked at his website, they haven't looked at what he does. Please, at least before you write me an email, look at my website, see my portfolio of companies, and see what I want. And I think, if you do that and then you personalize it, by the way, Raj, you just posted this. I really like your comment on that, whatever. It's so easy today to be very smart about your approach, and that's what you need to do.
I like that because it's like when someone applies for a job and they write a cover letter and they don't address your unique company. They're just like, to whom it concerns, yada, 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 right? And it's a turn off immediately because you're like, I'm not going to even call this person. I think you want to see some validation of effort. They're not just reaching out because they want the money. They're reaching out because they're interested in you and your operation. And that makes sense to me.
Absolutely. Otherwise, it goes into the circular filing cabinet.
That's exactly right. Do you often see parts of your own journey in the people that you invest in? And how has that affected your judgment calls?
Absolutely, the question. I mean, you can't help but to relate. I became a lot more compassionate investor, having gone through the journey myself multiple times. Not just founding, but funding, but also operating early stage companies. And it in some ways I feel a bit disheartened by the current VC market because there's so many people who are investing on behalf of VC groups that actually have no experience in operating or being in an operational startup. I think you really need to have compassion when you look at founders. I think you really need to understand the journey and you need to understand the difficulties. What we do, and at the minimum, we actually do give them insight and advice, so direct them in the right direction. Because most of the people who come to us are not suitable for our platform or our group. We've got a very specific way of investing. And of course, a lot of the time, it's not suitable. But I think you need to have compassion and allow and tell people where to go instead of coming to you, not just saying no. So you have to engage at a level where you're at the same level with the founder and you speak out of love and care and understanding, as opposed to, I've got the money, so I've got the power, which a lot of the time you get that conversation.
And I guess on the other side of the equation, right, like you have the person who's, building the company and then you're playing support, you're trying to execute empathy, and you're trying to understand things from their perspective and upskill and help them learn and educate themselves on what needs to happen. I guess being on the opposite side of that, you may be exposed to some scrutiny and to some negative opinions and to maybe some judgment or resistance from that entrepreneur. How do you handle that kind of situation?
Oh, we often meet founders who know better than we do. And that's okay. We don't necessarily have to help everyone, and we're not suitable for everyone. So It doesn't bother me at all, because it just shows that there's a lot of learning to be had, and it's not going to happen in this conversation or this relationship.
That makes sense to me, because you would rather be in alignment, because if you're butting heads, what's the point?
No, we don't want to get involved in butting heads. It's not necessary at all. Everybody's got, everybody's got their partner. Every key has a hole. Everybody has a match that they can work with. And if they come in with a particular attitude, it's okay. We don't need to do business. I mean, we certainly don't do business with 95% of people we meet.
Yeah, I like that. And it's about alignment. It's about building a community and having a relationship and trying to help people. One of my favorite quotes from Richard Branson is, well, what is a company? At the end of the day, it's a group of people, and that's about it. And it sounds like you see everything from a very humanitarian kind of perspective, where it's like, we're here to do good and help people and build community and try to build the best possible situation here we can. One of your quotes is, success is like happiness and joy. It's temporary, and it's a state of mind.
Indeed.
So with that, how has that impacted your career? Because I think if you're approaching things from joy and happiness, like, how has that helped you in the scheme of things over your career?
And it hasn't been always the way. And I think you need to learn from those experiences when it hasn't been always the way, how important joy and happiness is.
It's important, yeah.
It's really important. And, to see value and the love and the joy and the happiness in little things that happen along the way, I think that's success. To me, that's success.
There's been weird moments in my journey where, like, everything is hitting the fan. Like, shit's hitting the fan. One bad thing after another is happening. And you just find yourself in a mirror laughing. I don't know if you've ever had that experience.
Oh, absolutely.
Where you're like, I'm at breaking point and this is hilarious. And it's almost like, that mechanism kicks in. Have you had moments where things are really going bad? And how do you bounce back from those?
It's not easy to bounce back sometimes. And I have days where I've got this little mantra that, you're healthy, wealthy, and you're wise in the mirror in the morning. And sometimes I look at myself and say, you're not healthy, you're not wealthy, and you're not wise. And so, I think we all have those.
Yeah, we have those moments, right, where it's like, is it going the right way?
Yeah.
And then you question your sanity. It's pretty standard.
Look, I think I'm a family person, so to me, my daughter is a joy, and being a mother is one of the greatest things that happened to me. And when I look at something that is really going astray or going, as you say, things hit the fan, I just think I've got the most amazing family. Like, what else can I ask from life? And by the way, I had these enormously exciting experiences. And so, you just have to ride it through. And next day you wake up and you're in a better mood and go for a run, and the wind takes it all out of your head and you're back to normal.
I like that. And I think it's trying to find those magic moments in life. And for me, I'll be going through something stressful. I'll have a bad phone call or what have you. And then my 3-year-old daughter comes up to me. She's like, Daddy, I drew a mermaid. Look at this. And you're just like back in the present. Children have a gift of grounding you. And I think, for those that don't have children, just finding things that ground you to the beauty of life can really help on those tough days.
I just have that picture of what you just described, and it's so true.
Yeah.
The mermaid your daughter draws you is like the most precious, valuable, amazing thing. And it's so joyous.
Yeah, and it's hard to describe to people that don't have children, so I try to use pets. It's like when your pet does something amazing, they're like, oh my gosh, it's like that little magic moment that just reminds you, hey, life is beautiful, things are good, we're going to live another day and get back into it. Another quote of yours is, if you want to be the first movers, we better get ready to jackhammer because you have to break down some walls. What do you mean by that?
My story is about being a first mover in so many ways, in so many areas, and very often I didn't even realize I was doing what I was doing. Even at that point, when I look back, I was actually a jackhammer.
What do you mean by jackhammer? Just unrelenting?
Unrelenting, strong, capable, cutting through things that are not important, and getting to the point. That being direct, not always liked, sometimes noisy. So, but you got to make some noise sometimes to make a change, and obviously coming here. I give the example of when I was 9 months pregnant. And I was in investment banking, and we rocked up at this meeting in a big boardroom with all these people, and I had a huge belly, and I couldn't sit down properly at the table, so I was wobbling around, and I'm thinking, oh, I look around, there's all these middle-aged men around me. So there are moments when you think, it's okay, I've got a voice, I'm just going to say what I need to say. 9 months pregnant or not. So, sometimes you just have to get your business done and don't worry about all those other things that are happening around you.
So in the event where you're in this boardroom, you have a big belly, you're pregnant, and you're calling the shots and you're speaking with, I imagine, conviction and power and capability and all the rest of it. That dynamic, how have you found that personally in the space of business when you have personal things happening? How do you kind of put them to the wayside and get back to business? Is that something that you've had as a gift, as a superpower of yours per se, being able to kind of leave the emotions at the door and get it done?
I don't think it's my superpower. I think it's just the way it is. You have to get things done. I'm very outcome driven, so you just get things done. And when I look back at it now, I think sometimes I'm thinking, how did I even do that? Because when you're young and ignorant, you do things because you actually don't see the obstacles. You just go and do things. And then when you learn all the problems and things, suddenly you became fearful and you look back, oh God, So sometimes it's really good just be ignorant and go for it and do things and not be aware of all the bits that can go wrong.
I think that it's interesting what you just said about sometimes you have to be ignorant in business. And there's been a season where sometimes not having all the information has actually been to my benefit. Do you find that this is something that's common in business? People overanalyze, overthink, over prep, over plan when they really need to get on that task in front of them.
I absolutely see that. And I think it comes in with the dynamic of risk, because the more you see, the more data you have, the more you see the risks as well. And it makes you fearful, and it makes you not take courageous steps sometimes that are necessary to break through barriers, to get a new technology on the market, to address a new problem. And I think it's a bit tough to kind of manage that sometimes, because obviously the more we learn, the more capable we are, or at least that's what we're supposed to be. Who knows? I do feel that the dynamic with risks and avoiding the risk and fear, it's very interesting with knowledge, risk, that kind of dynamic. I'm not sure I'm making my shot very clear, so you might want to cut that.
I really like what you just said. I think it's very prolific, because sometimes having the information can make you scared. And then looking at the risk can deter you from maybe making one of the best moves in business that you've made. There's been times in our business where the data doesn't make sense whatsoever. And my gut is screaming at me, do it, go for it. And then we do it, and it, for some bizarre reason, works. And there's moments in business you can't calculate. Do you have a framework of thinking when you look at risk? Like, how do you dissect risk and go, this is a worthy investment despite the data? How do you kind of gauge? Is it gut? Is it always data? Is it an amalgamation of experience and gut and data? Like, how do you navigate those situations?
Such a good question, such a good question. And when you're in the actual process of it, you don't analyze what the dynamic of that is. But I think it's a mixture of all of that. I think certainly with experience, your gut feeling evolves as well. And I'm very data-driven. I really love seeing the data, even if it's not good data. I love to see that, because it doesn't mean that we won't invest, and it doesn't mean that we will, but it will be instructive in where the business is. So the more of that you can bring in, the more of your business plan you can bring into me in numbers. And I always say to the founders, don't give me a 30-page business plan. Give me a 1-page spreadsheet, and I'll tell you where your business is. But having said that, obviously, all those other things that I listed before are really important, and that's where the gut feel comes in. And that, okay, well, the data is right, but something is not feeling right, or the data is not great, but actually all those other things are working, so let's go ahead.
Has there been a moment in your career where the data doesn't make sense and your gut said to do it anyway?
The biggest one that I can think of is going into the US. It made no sense because it requires so much money and so much investment. And, everybody said to us, if you don't have 10 million per product, don't even start in the US. We went and did it anyway. At the very first meeting, we took our product to the US. The very first meeting was Neiman Marcus. And the buyer basically said, I've got 5 minutes. I don't have time.
Wow.
And we're not interested. So I sat down with him and said, it's okay, I take 5 minutes. And an hour and 20 minutes later, his wife was knocking on the door because they had to pick up their daughter from netball practice. And we sold into Neiman Marcus. So, I knew that the product, the real market for the product is US. I knew it's the premium market. And everybody was telling us about, no, it's not premium, don't go to the US, all those things. And then it just fell into place.
What do you think that was inside you that was calling you to do it?
Well, it's definitely the gut. I mean, there was no data, I can tell you.
Maybe a little bit of stubbornness, a little bit of I think or I feel.
Yes, but from my understanding of the actual market, not our data, because our data made no sense, but the understanding of the market and understanding the problem and what we were addressing, it made perfect sense. It made no sense to me to spend 10 million in Australia for a market that must be 20 million. Whereas if we spend 10 million in the US, it's a market that is 300 million. To me, fundamentally, the numbers were right. So I think that, plus the fact that I truly believed in the product and that it solves a real problem. I think that the combination. And then, of course, I had to do PR, which was then the downside. I suddenly got really scared. Oh, God, I have to be, the face of the product. Could we have someone else, someone really well qualified to be the face of the product? And then, of course, they tell you, no, actually, you're the most qualified person to be the face of the product. So And that comes down to our conversation about personal branding.
Oh, yeah. It's a common one we get where someone's building a business. They're extremely passionate about it. Things are going well, but they're terrified to put their face in front of it. What would be your advice to those people?
Just do it.
Suck it up.
Suck
Yeah.
it up and do it, and make sure you've got good advisors, a really good PR firm. Obviously you really need to believe and know your product and your service or whatever you're doing, but you need to do it. I've not done PR road shows with major publications before, and then I was on the road in New York from going from Mary Claire to Good Housewife, or one journalist to the other, each a different level of understanding. We had a very technical product, so you learn it along the way. You actually have fun, because that actually is really fun.
You got to find fun in the business space for sure. Make it worthwhile. Coming into a close here, for those who are listening and are on their journey at whatever stage they're at, what's a mantra you wish you could give them to repeat to themselves every day?
So I recently had a conversation with someone who's much wiser than me, and I asked him the same question. And after he gave me the answer, I 100% agree with him. So I'm going to use him. And he said, follow your passion. Sorry, don't follow your passion, follow your curiosity. Do not follow your passion because nobody cares. But follow your curiosity. Find the problem that you want to solve, and it gives you joy along the way. And that's what is going to deliver success ultimately.
That hits. Goosebumps. Very cool. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this conversation. How can people connect with you and reach out to you if they want to talk?
So I am on LinkedIn, so absolutely reach out on LinkedIn. Stride Equity is also our company where they can reach out. And most recently, we've launched a Sprint Investment Ready program. And so if there are founders out there who need some help in getting themselves investment ready, by all means, reach out. We've got another program coming up in August.
Wonderful. And for all of those listening, we'll put the links in the descriptors below for you to go and check that stuff out for yourself. And I imagine, there might be a few people in our community that might reach out. It's been a joy. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for unpacking this with us. And we hope to have you back sometime.
Jane, thank you so much. It was so much fun.